Okay, we are live this morning. It is the Senate Transportation Committee. It is Wednesday morning and the weather's been nice and we're looking forward to spring. And our first item this morning for the committee is the confirmation of Mike Sherling, Commissioner, Department of Public Safety. And good morning, Mike, if you're with us.
Good morning, Senator. I see you're still winning the battle of fancy ties, even on Zoom.
Look at that background. That background is right across from my store that he has in his picture, and he has a boat down there. And first, Mr. Sherling, I want to thank you for all the hard work your department has been doing in the past year or so, and always, but a lot of issues have been on the front burner, and we want to thank the police throughout the state and rescue. So with that, Mr. Sherling, you are our Department of Public Safety Commissioner, and would you like to stay there and just tell the committee a little about yourself? Thank you.
I think, thanks, Senator. I think on the first question, I'd like to stay here. I think it depends what day it is. We could get COVID in the rearview mirror.
That's what I thought. I bet some days he's wondering, he wants to be down on his boat over here and just forget everything.
There were a variety of advantages to being the Commerce Secretary.
Right.
But in seriousness, the public safety team, along with so many, hundreds of people in state government, have really had quite a run over the last 12 months. It's been an honor to play a tiny role in the state's COVID response, along with a variety of other things that have happened in tandem with that, including substantial reimagination of the way we do policing in Vermont. It's been an honor to be part of that process together with the General Assembly. Briefly about me, I've been in public service since 1986. I started right down the street from you as a volunteer on Colchester Rescue, and over the years through my time in high school and both undergrad and graduate school at the University of Vermont, was fortunate to have a variety of roles, primarily in Burlington, where I served the last 7.5 years of a 26-year run as chief of police, and then transitioned out of that to run a tech sector economic development initiative called BTV Ignite for about 18 months. Prior to getting a call from the governor's transition team asking if I'd be interested in participating in the executive branch for a period of time. So I served 3 years as the Secretary of Commerce and Community Development, and then transitioned September of 2019 to public safety, which for anybody watching is comprised of not only the state police, which I think gets the most attention, although not so much in the last year. Vermont Emergency Management, the State Emergency Operations Center is within the department, the Division of Fire Safety, Vermont Forensic Laboratory, the Vermont Crime Information Center, a very technical radio technology services group that designs and maintains critical infrastructure communications for not only public safety communications, but for much of this the state's radio frequency and microwave technology statewide. And a host of other components. Again, it's been a privilege to serve in this role, especially through the COVID months, and happy to elaborate more on my background, whether it's in education or a variety of sort of fun and exciting things I've had an opportunity to do over the years, from consulting for the U.S. State Department to traveling around the country doing instruction on a host of different topics. But I won't bore you with all of that unless you have a specific interest in it.
Now, one of the things I'd just like to point out, of course, the state police do a great job in our state, and for those of us or those who don't know, we don't have 24-hour coverage. But my fear is all the time that the state police are being called on to do more and more, because if the community does not have police coverage or wants to do away with it, sometimes they rely on the state police. And so we have to be very careful about that, because if a community is small and doesn't want to pay for coverage, they just call the state police. Well, that puts a burden on state police, and it stretches them pretty thin. So I've always been concerned about that. As long as the communities have their own police department, that's fine. But I always worry that they're going to continue to ask more services. And we all now know that the state police don't operate with full capacity. I'm sure it's a job getting help, plus filling the vacancies. But with that, we'll open up the questions from the committee. Any member of the committee have any questions for Mr. Sherling this morning? Yes, Senator Kitchell.
Well, I would just like to hear your thoughts. Obviously, we've passed a variety of bills around bias and the training that officers get and how they conduct their work. Certainly, a lot of people's perception are framed by what we see on the news, no question about that. So I was just wondering, from your perspective as you manage that whole effort to look at how our police are trained, how that culture is altered if it needs to be. You've seen the data, et cetera. So as the leader of that entity, I wondered if you could just speak to us as you continue in this job, how your thoughts about how you're going to continue that work and implement the spirit of the legislation that's been passed.
That's a great question, Senator. We could probably spend 2 days on this topic alone. When we talk about how to lead an organization and through a period of what I would describe as accelerating change, the types of things that have passed in legislation recently and the types of conversations that are happening nationally have been going on, and work has been going on in Vermont and in the state police in particular for 10 or 15 years in earnest. So what we're seeing most recently is an acceleration of that work, sort of stepping on the gas to make things happen quite a bit faster. But as we talk about leading an organization and really making long-term cultural change, which takes quite a while, we look at it in a continuum of beginning at the hiring process, ensuring that you've got a solid hiring process that is reflective of the values of the organization, reflective of the values of the community that the organization serves. Same thing cascades into promotional processes. So folks that are supervisors hold those same values, are instilling those ongoing values in the folks that they're supervising. Same thing with hiring chief executives. We're working on a playbook for communities now to hire chief executives that they can look to help them, whether it's a select board, a town manager, a mayor, or others, or the community itself, go through that process. It's good policy development. I know one of the things that passed, a couple of the things that passed helped to frame statewide policy for, well, hundreds of years in Vermont. We have very much embraced local control. And while we don't want to discard that, there are certain types of things that local control does not lend itself to consistency in operations. So whether that's use of force, bias-free policing, probably at least three or four, maybe a few more areas that we're exploring having not only model policy, but unified state policy. I think that's important. Training, of course, weaves through all of that. And then once you've selected your supervisors, having them actively managing things. So like any organization, trying to identify areas of improvement, ensuring that you're looking at consistent improvement on a day-to-day basis. And ultimately, there are times where we've got to hold people accountable, and particularly in the state police, but also, I can speak to Burlington. When I was there, the organizations are actually harder on themselves than the community is. We talk about holding ourselves to a higher standard. I don't think it's always believed based on what you see in the national media coverage, but I can tell you in Vermont unequivocally that the folks within the organizations hold each other to an incredibly high standard. And that's evidenced by more than 50% of complaints and ultimately internal investigations that exist in the state police are generated from within the organization, not externally. And then finally, it's sort of rinse and repeat. You go through that process again in the continuous improvement. You're looking at how to improve your promotional process, how to improve the hiring process, how to improve policy, training, and supervision on an ongoing basis. So it's not a stagnant thing. So when you look at leading these kinds of organizations, and I don't want to overstate it and say that it's all the commissioner, or it's all the colonel, or it's all the chief of a particular department. It really is about instilling these values and leaving behind a process that can be replicated regardless of who is sitting in any particular chair.
Senator Perchlik.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, Commissioner, and along similar lines, I wanted to ask about R&R, not rest and relaxation there on Mallets Bay, but recruitment and retention, and what the leadership, what you are doing to make sure we are. You mentioned a little bit there in your answer to Senator Kitchell, but recruiting the best officers, mainly for the troopers I'm talking about, but also, could you tell us where we are as far as just the core of the troopers as it reflects Vermont, as far as how we're doing about getting the gender and racial bias or not bias, racial and gender basis of the troopers, so that it reflects all Vermonters?
Great questions. Recruitment and retention continues to be the number one challenge, and that challenge is becoming more and more acute on a day-to-day basis as we're seeing more and more people. Not only historically people can jump or do jump from department to department, or maybe they look for a lateral move into a federal agency, which is a different kind of work. Now we're seeing people departing and looking to leave policing entirely, which is not particularly surprising given the national narrative. So trying to bring people along with change and including them in the process, which I think is something that has been difficult over the last year. It really has felt like there's a lot of people, I'm talking nationally, intentionally excluding people that have dedicated their lives to communities from the conversation. I think we really have to take a hard look at very mindfully not doing that going forward, because it is damaging our ability to recruit and retain the right people. On recruitment in general, the emphasis has been on trying to get a much wider net. So not just looking at people who, and this goes back again, a decade or more, in some cases, a couple of decades, not just looking at people who are in college in criminal justice programs or have a military background, but diverse teams produce better results. So the greater latitude in where we recruit from is incredibly important. So all kinds of different backgrounds, of course, all kinds of different races and cultures. Whether in terms of the question about being reflective of the community, we are not. And that is an incredibly difficult challenge for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is the national narrative is don't trust these particular organizations. So why would you, as a person of color or a non-traditional candidate into a policing career, want to be part of an organization that you are told repeatedly you should distrust? So we're trying to break through and have been trying for many years to break through that. The primary way that we've seen success in Vermont in doing that is by having envoys, so people within particular cross sections of the community that can act as an ambassador in that recruiting process, rather than it being a white male or white female state police trooper assigned to the recruitment process. That's been a successful component of that. In terms of where we are right now, if we were completely reflective of the community, we'd be 51% female. We're somewhere just south of 20%. This has been higher in the past, but through ebbs and flows, it kind of moves around a bit. We have had some success in recent months, and I think you may have seen some press coverage of recruiting into the most recent classes, persons of color across the BIPOC community, Asian American community, New Americans, So knock on wood, that's going well, as well as can be expected under the circumstances, I think. Important to note, however, that once folks of varying backgrounds are in the job, it's not always easy for them, either because of bias they face from community members, or being looked upon differently within their own communities because they've joined an organization that is doing the kind of work that we do. So it's and I'm not doing the description justice, because again, it would take a really long time to dive into all of the details, but the recruitment and retention landscape, looking at it through any one of a myriad of lenses, is just so complicated right now that we don't have all the answers. We've only got a few.
All right, thank you.
Further questions? Anybody else on the committee? Senator Chittenden, anything?
Senator Ingalls has his hand up.
Excuse me?
Senator Mazza. Senator
Yeah.
Mazza.
Yes, I'm sorry. I didn't see him. Ingalls. Yep, go
No
ahead.
problem. Commissioner, first of all, I just want to thank you for what you do. Your organization is the ultimate organization of professionals. I intermingle with your troopers, not on a daily basis, but in my public service and in my career in business. Just a stellar bunch of people, of all people, from the past retirement people and the people that are there. I had an occasion on this. We had an unfortunate incident at one of my businesses where I've on this last Saturday, where I met 3 or 4 of your members, and just always impressed by the professionalism. Most of them are my friends. I'm really concerned, really, the way policing is going in the state of Vermont, as far as even the ability for these troopers to even protect themselves. It's just going to seem that there's so many restrictions putting on them. It's going to be easy. It's going to go in the reverse of what is intended. It's going to be easier to shoot somebody than it is going to be able to wrestle somebody after all failed attempts of trying to communicate with these people that the actions that they're taking are going to cause that bad action. So I'm your guys' biggest defender. I think we need to do a better job of supporting the rank and file. The pressures that are put on you, the political pressures put on your organization, are just, to me, unbelievable. You guys just do a stellar job with it. I hope that we can. I do agree with the mission. I agree with what we are trying to do, but there comes a time where you can only do with what you do. And I'd like to see more support put your folks' way. And I think that would go a long ways to get to the missions that everybody wants to do. So I rambled on a little bit, but thank you for what you do. You just got to know, in my book, you guys are number one. And I want to do a shout out, something that Senator Mazza first pointed out. We are in my area in the Northeast Kingdom, we are seeing some pressures of not enough policing up here, and where we are relying more and more on the state police, where they are stretched incredibly thin. One shout out to Lieutenant Deborah Munson for some time that she spent in one of my big towns of Barton, where the sheriff and the town government couldn't come together, and Lieutenant Munson's been down there and reassuring voices, and letting them know that hey, should you need some protection, we're a phone call away. So good for her. But again, thank you. Sorry to ramble on, but I'm your biggest fan, and I think we just need to do a better job of making sure that you folks understand that we have your back as much as you have ours. Thank you.
I appreciate that, Senator. If I may just respond briefly, I do think that whether it's the state police or local agencies and first responders in general across the state do enjoy broad support on the part of Vermonters. I don't think you always see that reflected in news cycles, particularly in policing. If I were to put one thing out of this conversation on my wish list, it would be that we remember that we're employing human beings, and they're going to make mistakes, and we make mistakes every single day, and that's just the nature of an imperfect world. Most of those mistakes do not result in anything catastrophic, but even the small ones sometimes become front page news or are spun in a particular critical direction. So my wish would be that folks just remember we're employing people that are doing the best they can under very fast moving, difficult circumstances, oftentimes in the middle of the night in the rain. And it is imperfect. It is always going to be imperfect, despite all of the things I mentioned earlier about trying to get the highest performance possible out of the organization and out of each individual component of the organization. So, supporting people, picking them up and dusting them off when they make a mistake, not a malicious mistake. That there have been some high profile national things that are not mistakes. There are crimes, but those are rare. So I appreciate the support and I appreciate the opportunity to throw out that little nugget as well.
Senator Engel said it well, and I think shares a lot of folks in Vermont that are that feel the same way. And because it's public news, I will state that Burlington is going through a transition, and they want to do away with shifts in their department. And my fear is that they think the community will be able to call the state police for coverage, and that's what I said earlier on. I hope that's not the case, because the state police are not going to be able to back up Burlington, even though they want to cut their police department for whatever reason. Someone's got to call or answer the calls, and the state police will not be prepared. Neither should they, with the thin force they have to answer Burlington's calls. So it's been in the paper every day. I'm not stating anything that people don't already know, but I'm sure that people will be asked to call their state police. Any other questions? Senator Chittenden.
So Senator Mazza, on that point, I would love to ask a question of Commissioner Sherlin.
Go ahead.
If he sees a state role for concerns, not just state troopers having to fill the gap of any Burlington shortage of coverage, but also neighboring communities like my hometown of South Burlington. I could see South Burlington having to fill that gap if you see a role there. But before I turn the floor back to you, Commissioner Sherling, I want to echo much of what Senator Ingalls said and also what Senator Mazza said. Police officers have a really tough job, and they don't get enough praise for the hard work that they toil through every day and what they do to keep our communities safe. So I hope that they know that they're very appreciated by many in Vermont, and myself included. And I have many family members that are police officers, and we can't thank them enough for all the hard work that they do. But if you have any thoughts on how any concerns from how the state can help ensure that Burlington remains safe, regardless of what the Burlington City Council might do regarding shift coverage, I'd love to hear them.
Thanks, I think, for the question. This is a little dicey. We don't typically comment on other departments and other communities' choices, but it has been very much front page news, and there have been communications circulated around coverage questions from the Burlington City Council. So I will wade into this because of that. I do have grave concerns about the department's ability to cover what is a 35 to 40,000 call per year volume in 16 square miles, by far the busiest piece of real estate in the state. To give you a sense of how that compares, the state police respond to a comparable 125,000 calls per year. About half of those actually are proactive traffic enforcement and other kinds of things. So it's about 50% of the state police volume of 125,000 events a year is traffic enforcement because of the highway overlay. In Burlington, that's it's a tiny cross section of that 35 to 40,000 calls. At any given time, based on the state police staffing out of the Williston barracks, the troopers, if they were all assigned to Burlington, could only cover one, maybe two of the 5 patrol districts. So even if they called for mutual aid, the mutual aid is designed for the unusual, largely unanticipated need to back someone up. And that exists in police, fire, and EMS, so it is not exclusive to policing. But it cannot be relied on in any way to cover day-to-day calls for service. So what will likely happen is as the numbers continue to erode, you won't, South Burlington, Winooski, I think Colchester, the adjacent towns, will not be able to provide day-to-day call coverage. So those calls will wait in a queue for responses that will take just longer and longer. And really where that becomes a problem is not so much the late reported break into a car or a burglary that you find when you return home and the intruder's no longer there. It's the in progress calls. Burglaries in progress, domestic assault that's occurring, fights that are occurring in the downtown or anywhere else in the city. You know, your ability to handle those calls gets dramatically reduced because it requires more than one responder for each call. So you may go not only from having not enough shift coverage, but you may go to an inability to respond to more than 2 or 3 in progress calls. You know, on a Friday night in Burlington, you could have 10 in progress calls going at the same time. So those might result in mutual aid requests because there's an in progress high impact call. And now you're depolicing the adjacent communities and highways because you've got people responding to those things in the city. So I can't overstate the level of concern I have for what may happen and likely will happen as a result of the resource challenges that are going to be faced in the busiest community in the state.
Okay, Jane. Sorry, Senator Kitchell.
Well, one thing that I think that is so important, communities that decide to downsize or eliminate, if they are under the assumption that they're going to have the same level of service
Right.
and it's just going to be provided by the state police, are making a decision on wrong information. They are not going to get a response. They're not going to be a priority. And so part of this is how residents decide they want to respond. But if they're making a decision to reduce resources, it would be very false to suggest that there's the capacity there to simply make it up. And some towns actually contract with the sheriff's departments to
Right.
provide additional resources based on their need. And so I do think that there's been a lot of discussion around what the state police can do, but the reality is they can only do as much as they have the resources to do, and they have priorities. And if communities make those decisions, they need to do it with their eyes open, that it's not going to simply be replaced. But I wanted to go back, one just last comment. We saw the news about I think it was a Somali officer, I think from Burlington. And actually that young man had come to a meeting with a number of the senators, and really we were so impressed. And I know that was his goal. And there was the issue around the way in which the state exam disadvantaged certain populations, how things are worded, et cetera. And obviously that was overcome. And but you talked about once you're there, the difficulty either with your home community or with the community you're serving, or even in some cases, maybe the culture in which you're entering. So that gets to Andy's question about retention. Are there certain things that you've identified that would help someone coming in under those circumstances to give them additional support or a resource or whatever to make sure that if anything comes up, that rather than having it escalate and then it's beyond repair, to support them in as they for the first couple of years of employment and get established?
That's a great question. And actually, just to start on the first item, you're absolutely right, Senator. The state police will cover any community that doesn't have coverage, but it is a base level of coverage. You're not going to get typically foot patrols, active community problem solving and engagement. We do that on a case by case basis, but just not resourced, and certainly not resourced to do that in the larger cities and towns in Vermont that have chosen to have their own departments, and they have them for that reason. On the retention front, I would point to 3 things. 1, The first is just rudimentary, is ensuring that the barracks that you're in has open lines of communication through your field supervisor, first of all, your field training officer, and then eventually your field supervisors, the sergeants and the barracks commander, and having that active level of engagement to ensure that you know how folks are doing on an ongoing basis. The second is assigning mentor officers, peers that act as a sounding board, so you don't have to go to a supervisor for everything, because sometimes people are uncomfortable doing that for various reasons. And then the third thing is the peer support team that is in place. It's led by Dr. Lori Gurney. And this is an issue for first responders, not only in policing, but ensuring that people have an outlet to talk about the stressors of the job on an ongoing basis, to get performance coaching. And then when critical incidents occur, or people are facing stressors like if they face bias while on the job, or they have an issue within their communities like we've described, that they have a place to go and talk specifically about that, talk through the issues, and come up with strategies to respond and handle those things. So there are others, but those are the three components I think that are most important.
Thank you.
Okay, Senator Perchlik.
I have a transportation question. So when we had Commissioner Manolian, she was talking about a new electric vehicle that their enforcement division is buying. So I wanted to know if you had any announcement about electric vehicles your department is
Motorcycle.
acquiring.
No, not yet, Senator, but that is a question that I have asked. It's something we've explored for some of the vehicles. We're waiting for the technology to catch up in terms of range, primarily.
You don't want to get called on a call and can't get there.
Yeah, and there's an ancillary component, which is there's a bunch of gear that has to be run, and a bunch of gear that has to be transported, which makes the cars a little bit heavier because it's basically a rolling office. So those things have conspired so far to prevent us from going electric, but I have no doubt that that is the future. We've even explored electric and hybrid for command staff that doesn't have to carry around that kind of gear, and I would expect that will be the first to happen, and then detectives, et cetera. We're also going to learn from the COVID experience, and I anticipate that our number of miles driven for non-patrol operations will not quite be COVID-like, but certainly not pre-COVID-like either. We'll be doing a lot more meetings over Teams and Zoom, and leveraging the technology so our carbon footprint is reduced even before we get to the electric vehicles.
Okay, well, thank you very much. That was a good discussion this morning, and we enjoyed it. Get those questions answered. And so unless there's further questions, I will entertain a motion.
So moved.
Okay, Senator Kitchell has moved the confirmation of Mike Sherling as Commissioner of Public Safety,
And a second.
and seconded. Okay, want to take the roll?
Yes, so I would start with myself. The clerk votes aye. Senator Ingalls, how do you vote?
Yes.
Senator Perchlik, how do you vote?
Yes.
Senator Kitchell?
Yes.
Chair Mazza?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
And be sure to tell Colonel Birmingham we support him too, okay?
I'll do that. I don't know if this was a successful hearing or not, since I'm going to continue doing this job, but thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Now,
Thank you.
we need a reporter.
Yes.
I don't have a problem. I'll report it.
Okay. All right. Okay. Senator Ingalls, you report it. Thanks, Mike, and you can get back to work now. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.
The ice is almost out of the bay over there, so you're getting close.
Ready to go.
Ready to go. All right. Thank
Have a
you.
great day.
Okay, you too. All right. We'll move right on to our next item this morning. Amtrak to Burlington, rail upgrades. Dan is with us, and Paul Libby. Dan, would you like to lead off this morning?
Yes, thank you for having me in. Dan DeLabriere, Rail and Aviation Bureau Director for VTrans. This morning, we're going to be giving you kind of an update, a little bit of detail on the Amtrak to Burlington, where we are, what our goals are, that type of thing, a little history on how we got to where we are. I do have Paul Libby, who is our Senior Project Manager for our Rail Bureau. He's going to be presenting this morning. Looks like he's getting his slides up now. We'll go through this fairly quickly. I see we're a little behind schedule, so we'll try to help you catch up a bit. But we do have a lot to cover. And Paul, I guess I'm going to turn it over to you as soon as you're ready.
I just want to say I want to buy tickets already. Let me know when I can buy tickets. To get
Yeah, we're so excited. I got to tell you, we're so excited for.
Oh boy, that's one ribbon I can't wait to cut.
Yeah. No, it's been a long time coming, Senator, and we've been working hard to get us there. So
I guess so. Way back from Howard Dean days.
yeah. All right.
Good morning,
Paul,
Senators. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks, Dan. We'll get right into this and start talking about the Amtrak to Burlington service and what it really takes to make this happen, some of the history, and I'm assuming everybody can see my screen too. I can, so hoping everybody can. All right. Nods are good things. I gotta make sure I can advance it here. There we go. So looking at some of the history, so back in the 60s when we purchased our first railroad, there was not passenger service at that time, but some 30 years later, Amtrak came back into Rutland with the goal of
Paul, for some reason, we have a gray bar that's covering after 1996. We only have part of the next section of your timetable there.
On the right-hand side of the screen, is it your Zoom console? Or
yeah,
something?
it probably is my Zoom console. I'm gonna try to move that thing. Sorry. I am trying to do that. How do I see?
Can you hide it, Paul? Can you hide that console down?
I am sure trying to. Sorry, here it's.
We've never seen this before. It's odd little error. We'll take 5 tickets. I'd love to go straight to Manhattan.
Usually I can move around this box there. Let's see if that works. Try to put it at the top. Sorry about that.
If this doesn't work, Liz has this presentation and can run the video or run the slides for us.
Is that better?
Now it's up top, but we can see the timeline.
Is there a way to get rid of that?
You have 2 screens. You put it on the other screen.
I don't today. Put it down at the bottom, maybe that.
Well, if there's nothing above the trains, then that's a little better. Shrunk it.
Why don't we?
To have Liz do it.
Yeah. Why don't we
Dan,
have
you wanna-
Liz? Why don't we have Liz
Okay.
take over the screen?
Okay.
Can you see?
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, just
Yep.
let me know when to move the slide.
Okay, great, thanks.
Good.
So back in the 60s when we bought the railway, there was no longer passenger service at the time, as 10 years prior it was suspended. But some 30 plus years later, Amtrak did come back into Rutland, and that kind of sowed the goal of bringing passenger service back to Burlington. Next, please. So a lot of a little bit too far. Back one. There you go. So a lot of effort went into starting to secure funding for bringing this passenger service back into Burlington from Rutland. So beginning in 05 with a Jeffords earmark, to a couple of Tiger grants in 13 and 15, with the same goal of passenger service back by 22. Next, please. So going into a little bit more detail about what some of these federal funding efforts look like. The Jeffords earmark in the mid 2000s was around 30 million, I think that's right. And it included CWR, which is a continuously welded rail, so no joints, no click noises when you're operating a train on it. Surfacing, which is essentially the stone that you see, ballast, and ties. So all the infrastructure essentially to support a new rail system, as well as some bridges and crossings were part of that first earmark project effort from Jeffords. Next, please. Going into a little bit more about the Tiger 5 grant, which was in 2013. It was a section from Rutland to Leicester. There was around 10 miles of rail upgrades to replace the jointed rail that was there. So a lot of inherent crossings, like we call them farm crossings. They're essentially used for agricultural use or some other type of crossing that may not be vehicular in nature. So that was kind of the first project that was related to specifically to one of the Tiger grants. And next, please. And Tiger 7 was largely the biggest component, or the one of the last components of finishing up the Rutland to Burlington segment for upgrading rail, improving crossings and bridges. There was some new sidings that were added. So when you think about Amtrak running on a train on the line, freight has to be out of the way. So we had to build some new sidings or crossovers to allow the freight trains to get basically out of the way of the passenger train. So we have to create a space for those freight trains. So some of that infrastructure was built as part of this grant and as part of Tiger 5 as well. Some switches went from manual switches to automatic switches, which can be basically you can switch the direction of the train with the button at dispatch versus doing it manually. As well as one of the big efforts of platforms in Burlington, Middlebury, and Bridgends. Next, please. So a little bit more about continuously welded rail. There was over 120 track miles from Rutland to Burlington of CWR that we had to do, and so that's a lot. And in order to maximize the efficiency of the installation, these pieces of rail come in about 1/4 mile long sticks. So they come on a train. As you can see in this picture, it's a really long piece of steel, and they drop it right down next to the tracks, and they can begin their installation right adjacent to the existing infrastructure. So it doesn't come on trucks, comes on trains, reduces all the number of welds, much more efficient and quick installation. Next, please. Inherently, we go through all these crossings as well. So the controlling the interface between trains and vehicles is very important, and so we take that very seriously, and we want to increase and improve and maximize the protection that we have at our crossings. So whether it's a signal system, gates, the surface, sight distance, so you can see trains coming or vice versa. It's very important to be sure that our crossings are in good shape. So over 20 crossings were upgraded from the Jeffords earmark through today to prepare for passenger service as well as freight service that increase speed. So Amtrak train can go up to 59 miles per hour on the track rating that we have, and freight speeds are around 40 miles per hour. So it's fast trains, and so if you have a crossing that's unprotected, you think twice about running a train through that speed. So we did a lot of improvements to many crossings from Rutland to Burlington to prepare for this service.
Question.
Chittenden?
So is that high speed rail, or then I don't think it is, but is it possible in the future that more upgrades could get us to high speed rail, or is that out of the cards?
So this is not considered high speed rail. This is only 59 miles an hour. So could we go to a higher speed rail? The answer is yes, with additional improvements. Typically what happens is when the next class of track to go to the next higher speed rail would require more protection above these, these crossing signals. It would require actual track signalization. And what I mean by that is you've probably heard of PTC before, positive train control. There's different levels of PTC, and to get to the next level, you'd have to put in some level of PTC to go to the next level, because this is still what's considered in the train world as dark territory, meaning you can't look at a computer screen and see where every piece of machinery on the track is, and there's no avoidance system which would prevent one train to come into the same territory as another train. And you'd need that technology to get to the next level, to get to what's called high-speed rail. And we don't have that here.
Chittenden wants to get to New York in a half hour.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Give
Slow
Vermont
down, slow down.
dark territory, huh?
Dark territory. You can go to the next slide if that was it, Senator Chittenden. So as we mentioned, that a lot of the upgrades also necessary have to do with where you stop the passenger train to pick up passengers. And so many of you may be familiar with the Virgin station, relocated from downtown Virgins just across the border into Ferrisburg, is now the Ferrisburg Virgins Amtrak station. So that depot has been fully restored inside and outside. There's a new 300-foot platform that's built and ready for passengers as soon as the train starts operating. But a combination of funding efforts brought this depot here, and it's a great place. It's right next to the park and ride, so there's sufficient waiting area, there's sufficient parking, there's business opportunities possibly in the building. And so it's a really, really great possibility and opportunity for a lot of different things here. Next, please. Sticking with the platform theme, we'll get into this one a little bit more further in the presentation, but this is in Burlington at Main Street Landing. On the left, you can see the existing, what it was previously. That's a canopy from the Champlain Flyer that went in. So that's a canopy we're going to reuse on the new platform. So that canopy has since been dismantled, disassembled, and stored until we build our new platform. On the right-hand side is a rendering of what it will look like, of a new 300-foot platform with a right-of-way fence, ornamental fence to protect the public from crossing in areas where we don't necessarily want them to. So protecting crossings is a big piece of what we do as well. So I'll get into this one a little bit more as we go through the slideshow. Next, please. The third location that was part of the Tiger 7 grant was in Middlebury. So this location was chosen through a public outreach process where the municipality, the town of Middlebury, was engaged. They went through multiple sites to choose the best one that worked for them. We worked closely with them so that they could have the most input as possible. The existing depot down in the city is right across from this location. It's privately owned and wasn't available as an option for us to restore or put a new platform in at that historic depot. So this location, which we will build this summer, is right across the tracks from that. It's again a 300-foot platform that's covered with 2/3 of it is covered with a canopy. So there's a covered waiting area. The parking area and the street improvements is something that the city is taking on themselves. So our funding was limited to the platform. And so the city decided, as part of their kind of their research project, to put in the parking and the street improvements adjacent to our platform for public access. So all this is going to be built this summer, right just north of the Middlebury Tunnel. Next, please. So speaking of the Middlebury Tunnel, I'm sure everybody here knows about this project.
Yeah, we saw it this week. We went through it all. Beautiful job. Beautiful.
This was a great project, and it was lots of birds here with just a few stones, but there was town highway bridges that were replaced. The tunnel is now a double stack clearance for trains. The rail itself infrastructure was improved. The drainage was improved. All in all, a great project here with a lot of good upgrades that were definitely necessary ahead of passenger and additional freight service through this area. So it's largely was completed in 2020, but the last pieces will be done this construction season as well, and in addition to the platform just north of it. Next, please. So get a little more into the passenger service in the Burlington area more specifically. Next, please. So just touching on it quickly, there was a study done of where to overnight the train in Burlington, with the rail yard being the chosen location. That's where we began our efforts and our focus on designing the area to accommodate the overnight for the train to put the Amtrak train, because it's going to come into Burlington at night and then it leaves again in the morning. So it needs a place to basically sleep. And so that's what option or location number 3 including. Next, please. So largely the Burlington area included a lot of track relocations, putting in that siding for Amtrak to overnight. There was a lot of work to do in the rail yard itself, which is just south of Main Street Landing. Some of the power switches that we talked about earlier, crossing improvements, platform improvements, rebuilding the platform, and access to that platform as well. So all of that is kind of generally what happened in the Burlington area. Touch on a little bit more of it more specifically as we go here. Next. So in the rail yard, we had to put a new siding in for Amtrak. So what that meant was the location that worked and the length we needed meant we had to move 7 other tracks to the west toward the lake and squeeze in another set of tracks in that area so we could overnight the Amtrak train. That's where it will be serviced for utilities. The water and the septic and everything will be serviced at that location. And it's south of the Main Street Landing area in the existing rail yard. So that project is part of what we're working on right now as well, and will be all part of this busy 2021 construction season in the Burlington area.
Yeah, just to add to that, Paul, I may interrupt. The other thing that has to be moved is the access road that accesses the sewer plant, Burlington sewer plant, is called the Valley Lane. And part of the squeeze isn't just in the tracks. One of the projects is actually sliding the Valley Lane to the west, which at the same time, you can see in this picture, there's a bike path right there too. So we have to move the road sort of into the bike path area and squeeze another track in. This was a huge domino effect and literally came down to inches whether everything fit in here. And this was quite a process to try to literally fit 10.5 pounds into a 10-pound bag here. So we struggled with this one. And we worked directly with the city of Burlington. They were a great partner on this. Still continue to be as we work through the construction piece. But this is while it just seems like, just throw in another track, this is very complicated and quite an engineering feat to fit another track in here. So sorry, Paul, I jump in there. Go ahead.
No, it's good. You can jump to the next slide, please. So we talked a little bit about power switches earlier, but if you think about when you want to take a train wants to take a different set of tracks, you have to change its direction. So the switches there now are manual, which means conductor has to get off the train and literally manually move a switch. That's how the train can take a different route. These power switches, which are part of the Tiger 7 grant, are automated, and and they're powered just like it sounds. You can control them without leaving the train. They're actually controlled through dispatch at the operating railroad's dispatch, which is in Rutland. And so when they need to have a train take a different route, especially Amtrak, they can do it manually or automatically, and no one has to leave the train. They can get the other trains out of the way of each other much more efficiently and quickly, as well as protect. It coordinates the train movements much more efficiently.
Yeah, and Amtrak wouldn't want to have to stop at the switch and get out and throw the switch. So you definitely want to. So the engineer in the locomotive radios dispatch, says, I'm at mile marker 121. He'll say, okay, I'm throwing switch, on track 7, whatever it is, and it'll keep you on the main line or put you onto the siding. So it's very, very efficient and much needed for Amtrak service to come into Burlington, where it's a very busy yard, lots of tracks, lots of switches. So this sort of has to be done to be an efficient service.
Next, please. So get into a couple of the just ideas of what has to happen with some of the signalization up there. So there's a lot of crossings that are really close to each other in the Burlington area. And so when there's a train that could possibly be in 2 crossings at the same time, literally the train's long enough to be able to do that in some areas, or it'd be in the island circuit, which is like the approach warning circuit of the track itself. You have to coordinate all those signals and all that electronics so that it speaks correctly to each other crossing, so it doesn't do something funky when the train's there, like set off the signals when there's no train, or hold up a crossing for no reason when there isn't a train, or it's too far away or something. So a lot of the brains, if you will, of these signal cabinets have to be coordinated from crossing to crossing to crossing, and infrastructure has to be put in so that all that can happen efficiently, which isn't something that's like an off-the-shelf design. You have to work them together as needed. So a lot of that has to happen in the Burlington area. So I just wanted to touch on that here. Next, please. So King Street is a crossing that's just south of Main Street Landing. Very, very busy crossing. It goes to Lake Champlain Transportation. And as everybody knows, COVID was impactful on many businesses. And so we were very sensitive and aware of that as we were working through our construction sequencing. We worked closely with that property owner so we could try to accommodate their needs as much as possible when it came to our construction schedule. So we did definitely, this King Street crossing is one that they were highly interested in at Lake Champlain Transportation. So we worked closely with them to try to accommodate as much as we could for them to operate their business, try to get back on their feet, at the same time get our work done. Next, please. College Street. So right by Echo, this is probably the single most busy intersection for pedestrians crossing a train track in the state. Everybody's probably been this area. It can be very, very busy in the summertime. So with the added trains and added passenger service of Amtrak, we want to make sure crossings like this are protected. So we're going to upgrade this crossing to include lights, gates, signals, and a concrete panel surface, which will protect the tracks and the vehicles on a more durable basis. One of the things we'd look to try to do is really, for lack of a better word, herd the pedestrians to cross where we want them to cross. So by using fencing, like ornamental fencing or sidewalks in well-designed areas, we can protect the pedestrians much better than is there today. So a lot of those improvements you'll see are subtle, but they're very intentional when we get done with this crossing, which will happen this summer as well.
Yeah. The interesting thing, complicated, but Amtrak won't actually crossing. The reason why we have to reconstruct this crossing is because several showed you a picture of looking south of here. We had these tracks to the east, which actually relocated the station thing, which means we have to location is now different. So even though Amtrak won't cross through this cross, we did have part of our project. Go ahead.
Breaking up on me, Dan. I don't know if others, yeah, couldn't hear what you just said, Dan.
I'm sorry. So I don't know if I can make it any better. Amtrak won't cross through this crossing, but we had to move tracks. So we had to rebuild this crossing because of track location. Yeah. See if that's better. Turn my video off. See if that's better. So yeah, we had to rebuild this cross, just not because Amtrak goes through, but because the track location moved. So, all right, go ahead, Paul. Sorry.
Yep. No, good point. You can go to the next slide, please. And so as Dan talked about earlier, we work really closely with the city of Burlington as they've got a major bike path project going on in the city in general. And in this area between King Street and College Street, the bike path was actually on the east side of the tracks, which meant there were two crossings of the tracks on either end of the bike path. So the bike path is actually going to be relocated to the west side of the tracks, and the new platform will go in where the existing bike path was. So on the left picture, you can see that's the previous location of the bike path. And on the right picture is after the bike path has now been taken out of service, and the tracks are going to be slid closer to Main Street Landing, and a new bike path is going to be built on the west side of the tracks. So it's going to eliminate two crossings from the bike path crossing the railroad tracks on either end of College and King Streets, which is a benefit, as well as putting in our new platform. So we work really closely with Burlington to try to make this work for all parties. The work is actually being administered this summer through our VTrans contract, but through Burlington's participation with funding. So a lot of work is going to happen this summer, from bike paths to platforms, crossings, tracks, sidings, switches. It's going to be very busy in Burlington. Next, please. So there's the ribbon cutting. I think somebody mentioned it earlier, but our goal, and we're much closer to it than we've ever been. 2022, bringing Amtrak back to Burlington. I think that's the last.
Thank
slide.
you. Any questions? Yes, Senator Chittenden.
So this is really exciting, and I do want to buy 5 tickets to go straight to Manhattan. But I also want to ask, how do you imagine this connecting with the airports in the area? Do you imagine us people being able to get onto a Burlington train and getting off at a major air hub on the same train somewhere near the New York area? I don't know enough about train service, and I'm just kind of curious if that can factor into how we might expect people that otherwise would fly out of Burlington to get to a large airport, if train service might become more attractive over BIA.
Yeah, so this train, the destination in New York, it's going to go to Penn Station, which is essentially right downtown. So that's not going to change. Our location in New York is the same. It just essentially extends it from Rutland into Burlington. So, but the nice thing about New York Penn is once you get there, you can essentially take a train almost anywhere in the country. So there you have all kinds of options. Obviously, there's public transportation that could get you to a hub airport, in New York. But certainly you could also take a train right out of New York Penn and go many different locations around the country. So this is super exciting. I think, to connect Vermont's largest city downtown, right from the downtown to New York City downtown. So this is I'm so excited about this. I can't wait. We're about a year away right now. It's been a long time coming, and Paul kind of touched on some high level projects, but there's a lot of things that have gone on, that Paul's team have put together for projects that are really getting us here. So, so I would say about a year from now, hopefully, we'll be standing on Main Street Landing platform and you'll be able to get your 5 tickets.
About 20 years ago, when Howard Dean was governor, we started the process of, and everybody fought him against it for the silent crossings from Burlington to Charlotte, Shelburne, if you remember that. And thank God he started it back then, because you'd never, the opposition probably be greater. I don't know what would happen, but that got us behind. We went through some tough time, public hearings, and oh my God, it was written up nationally about with the biggest boondoggle or something in Vermont, and it was terrible. But I thank Howard Dean every time I think about this, because we even got people convinced in Montpelier to go along with us, and Senator Ide was one of them to help us get this thing going, because otherwise there was a lot of sympathy to get rail projects in Burlington. But so it's had a long road and a long rail to get here, but it's so exciting to have it happen. So thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate it. Okay, would the committee like to go right on to the next one, or you want to take a break now?
Senator Mazza, can I ask a quick question?
Sure, go ahead. Yep.
Dan is still here. And that was about the right of way on passenger versus freight. I think Paul said something about that. And I just wanted to confirm my understanding of that. Is there like a national regulation about right of way between passenger and freight, or is that railroad by railroad or state by state, or how is that determined?
Senator Pershing, are you referring to the speeds
No.
of the train?
So if 2 trains are going to be using the same track, one of them has to go to the siding. How is it determined who has to venture to the siding and wait for the other train?
Great.
Okay, so I'm gonna actually, I'm gonna turn my video off for a second. So what we have to do is we have to have an operational plan, and that operational plan has to be submitted to the FRA, and the FRA kind of determines. So I was talking a little bit about PTC earlier, and so if you run a train on a segment of track, they have to see your operational plan and say, yeah, that's safe, or no, you need to add additional measures to make it safe. And sometimes that is PTC. So we have our plan. It's being submitted to the FRA at the end, actually next week. We've had conversations with them. The plan will be submitted by Vermont Rail Systems and VTrans as the owner, and Amtrak is on the application as well. So it just shows that the 3 of us have put together a plan to show where freight trains are going to be, what time. So this largely.
So it's route by route, Dan, like it's just a negotiation between the railroad and Amtrak every time, whatever route Amtrak is taking anywhere in the country?
Yes. So we have to look at freight schedules, Amtrak schedules, and this did have input into the projected schedule for Amtrak. So there's a couple of reasons. We're looking at having the train leave Burlington Station. I'm not give you an exact to the minute, but around 10 a.m. and it's going to get into Burlington at night around 10 p.m. And we had to put that in our operational plan, and we had to work freight schedules around that schedule.
But I guess I'm looking for an answer on the authority. So if you're running an Amtrak, let's say this one to Burlington, could the local owners of the track, I don't know if this is all state owned, but let's say there is some local track, could they say, hey, we're just not going to agree to side our freight train, you side your passenger train? Is there a rule that just like overrides kind of a local freight operators,
Well, yes. So there is a rule. Amtrak has the only federal authority that can say, we're going to run our passenger train on your railroad. So federally, they have that authority. They're the only passenger train in the country that has that authority. The sticky part is there's nothing in there that says you get to run your train at this time on your railroad. So that becomes the negotiating point. which is what we kind of just went through with Vermont Railway, Amtrak, and VTrans. So we think we have a good schedule for many reasons. Getting out of New York City a little later in the day is going to allow Vermonters to stay in New York City and come home at night. So we think that's a better schedule. It actually all kind of worked out for the best. So I think everybody was on the same page as far as we asked them for a particular schedule and they agreed to it. So I don't know that there was any opposition to that, but certainly VRS was at the table and we all negotiated a good schedule.
Okay, thanks.
And what's the turnaround time, Dan? I sorry if I missed that. From Burlington to New York City, what's the timeline? As far as we have from travel time from Burlington to New York City or vice versa?
It's like 7+ hours, 7.5 hours or so from downtown Burlington to New York Penn.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay, any other further questions? If not, thank you very much. That was a good overview, and
Thank you.
keep us posted on what's happening, and we'll look forward to the end results here. Committee with Dan's next on the Morrisville Airport. You want to take a break now or wait till after?
The next one's quicker if that makes a difference for the committee.
All right, you want to continue on and we'll take a break? Okay, let's continue on. We'll take a break then. Yep.
So another kind of high profile project that we have going in our division is the Morrisville Stowe Airport project. The project it's actually two projects together. Paul's going to get into some of the detail about what we're doing, but essentially it's a project that's going to increase safety and put a new fuel farm in for better service to the customer. So Paul, with that, I guess, Liz, you have that one, I think, also. We can put that up.
No, I can't.
Okay. He's in a meeting.
Yeah,
We'll call
yeah,
you later.
yes.
Perfect.
Great.
And with that, I'll hand it over to Paul.
Okay. Great. Thanks, Dan. So Morrisville Stowe, we've got a busy summer coming this year, and I can get into a little bit about what that is. So a little bit about the airport itself. There's charter flights you can take in and out of there. Flights to White Plains, New York are pretty common. There are on-site rentals cars available as a reservation with some pre-planning. But there's also a lot of support there, from maintenance to hangars, fuel, jet fuel, as well as avgas. And there's a de-icing program we can offer in the inclement months as well. Next, please. So as Dan said, there's two big projects coming, and these are FAA funded projects. The runway safety area, as we call it, or RSA, as we've dubbed it. Essentially, it's work on each end of the runway, as you can see in the graphic. We're extending, so there's always a safety area on a runway, and sometimes they're grass, sometimes they're paved. We're going to pave these safety areas at Morrisville, so it's essentially a 75-foot wide, which is the width of the runway, by 250 feet long. It kind of acts as a longer piece of the runway, but it's not usable or published as runway length. It's literally safety area. So if you're a pilot, you could back up all the way to the end of it and use it for takeoff length if you wanted to, but it doesn't assist with landing because you can't land any differently than you could with or without those paved areas. So that's one project we're doing first. The taxiway is the next piece of the project we're doing this summer, which, as Dan said, it increases the safety of the interactions from an airplane getting to the runway. Right now, they have to taxi to the end of the runway, turn around, and then take off. With these taxiways, they go down the taxiway, and then they enter the end of the runway once instead of having to back taxi on it to take off. So it increases safety by reducing any potential conflicts between aircrafts. Inherently, when we do the taxiway project, we're going to remove the existing fuel farm, and therefore we're going to put a new fuel farm in one of the later projects we do this summer. And so that's going to be a big plus, as the fuel farm was needed anyway. And so we're going to get that as part of this project at the end of the summer. It's going to be a really busy 2021 at Morrisville-Stowe Airport as well. The contracts are signed. The contractor is ready to go. They're actually mobilizing next week to begin construction. I'll get into the schedule a little bit more later, but we're ready to go. Next, please. So this is an airport layout plan. It's kind of, it's just that. It's our planning document that we use with the FAA, and it really works to align with the priorities that the Federal Aviation Administration has in their program. And so they think of their priorities from geographically. So think of runway, and then as the further you get from the runway, the less likely that'll be a priority for them to fund. And so anything to do with safety on the runway, definitely a top priority for them. So when we identify these projects and work with them to prioritize them, the closer they are to the runway, the more likely they are to be funded. And so that's why we're doing runway safety area projects and taxiway projects, because they're about as close to the runway as you can get. And so if you think of something further away, they're less likely to have funding opportunities for it. So we use this as a planning document to demonstrate and communicate to users or the FAA what our plans are should funding become available, or I won't say it's our wish list, but we want to demonstrate as much as we can on these plans so that they understand, the FAA understands what our goals are for these airports.
And just to get this, this plan right here really kind of shows what our project is. So currently, if you look at the runway and you see, for example, you see runway 19, and then you see all the bunch of white marks that are on the right beside that. The asphalt currently ends right at the ends of those markings. The runway safety areas that we're paving there's a kind of an arrow there. That's the new project. We're going to add those on each end. We're adding that area as a paved area. So when the plane goes to take off, it can sit in that paved area and take off and have an extra 250 feet or so of runway length on the takeoff. And on the landing, they don't technically have any additional pavement legally to use as landing length. However, the area is now paved. So, if there was a problem, they now have more asphalt to, run their plane out in an emergency and such. And you can see that on the left-hand side of your screen where the taxiway hooks on to that safety area, that's really important, because what it allows the planes to do is they can land and they can keep going in that same direction, and they can just get right off the runway, and they don't have to back taxi. And so it's much safer. And that taxiway now will be, you could have a plane holding on the taxiway for takeoff, and they can get right out of the airport a lot quicker. And that makes a difference because on this airport, we get a lot of holiday traffic, say President's Day and that sort of thing, where we get a lot of jets coming in. And this is going to increase the efficiency of this airport greatly. And again, that taxiway is going to the project goes, if you're looking at the plan here, there's kind of two red lines that show, existing taxiways getting onto the runway. And it's the sort of middle of the plan line. So the second, if you're going left to right, the second red line, that's where that taxiway, our project's going to stop. So we're going to go right to the apron, and that's where that taxiway. So we have other phases to the right of that, which are in our plan to do in later years. But the current taxiway goes from the left at the safety area over to the second red line, and that's where the taxiway stops in our current project. So just a little more explanation of our project. Sorry, Paul, go ahead.
Yep. So you can roll it on to the next slide, please. So just an image of looking on runway 19, looking north. So the area that's closest to us that's grayed out that's currently grass, but it will be part of the new safety area. So it just kind of illustrates, as Dan was saying, the added pavement that we're going to have on the end of this runway as a paved safety area.
So that plane that's taken off right there, instead of sitting there, it'll back up 250 feet and it'll take off 250 feet. So it's an extra 250 feet to take off.
Does that mean bigger planes or no?
Well, unfortunately, runways are designed for a design aircraft, and it doesn't bump this runway length up to the next size aircraft. But what it does do is it allows the planes that come in a little more kind of wiggle room or safety area, so that these jets that are coming in. So some of these jets that come in now, because our runway length it's a bit tight. So on a bad weather day, they might not come into this runway and they might divert to Burlington. But now that we're doing this project, they've got a little extra room and a little extra safety area. So they might come in now, but technically by FAA standards, it doesn't bump us up to the next level or next size plane.
Keep them out of Chittenden's area. Okay.
We got nothing.
Senator Mazza.
Senator Ingalls, go ahead.
Dan, do you see, and maybe we have it already, but do you see another airport being able to be like the Burlington Airport in the state of Vermont? Do you ever see that happening where you would have a national airline come in and offer connecting flights?
No, Rutland.
Yes. So we have two airports in the state of Vermont that have regularly scheduled passenger service. It's Burlington and Rutland. And the Rutland service, we have 3 flights a day to Boston, 7 days a week through Cape Air. And it's a subsidized service through federal grants. And we keep that service going. It's busy. It fills up. It's a 9-passenger plane. Could we do that in other places? The answer to that is, well, we have airports that have the capacity, but they would have to show to the FAA that we have the need. And essentially, we've asked several times to look at that. Rutland seems to be the only one that they'll subsidize currently, but we'll keep asking.
So a mile-long runway is probably something that's needed more than anything. I mean, and need, of course.
Yeah, a 5,000 foot runway certainly is nice. That's definitely that would to get to Senator Mazza's question. That's sort of the next size runway that gets us to the next size plane. This runway here in Morrisville it's 3,700 feet of pavement now. We're adding 250 feet to each end of safety area. It doesn't technically give us a longer runway, but we have extra safety area. But yeah, a 5,000 foot runway in Vermont would get us, a Cape Air service, certainly, which is what we have in Rutland.
We want an international airport in Newport. If we can get
Yes.
Yeah.
We have one.
Yeah.
Yes.
We have
Yes.
the Northeast Kingdom International Airport in Newport. We have that.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that is 5,000 feet. So
Yeah, I knew it was. That's why I was getting there. Thanks, Senator Mazza, for the plug. I appreciate it.
I was
Thank
thinking
you.
of that for you.
Thank you. Thank you. You served it right up, just a softball, and I hit it over
That's
the
right.
park.
That's right. Hit it out of the park.
Thank you.
One closing comment, Senator
Go ahead.
So I don't know how long I'll be serving in this role, but one thing I'm going to be constantly bringing up when you talk about these small airports is how much Vermont money is going into these, because as I see automated vehicles coming in online, I don't see as much of a need for these smaller scale airports when people will be able to get in a car or a mode or a pod or whatever it is and get to a larger airport and get to wherever they're going. I just see less of a demand for these things for the middle class and the masses trying to get about the country. So that's where I'm interested to know how much money Vermonters are spending versus how much of this is federal monies, but I think that's a conversation for another day.
yeah, I actually see it going the other way, Senator Chittenden. I think not only is there automated cars, but there's going to be automated aircraft, and that's happening at the same time. So, the FAA is very aware of the fact that you're not going to be able to just I'm gonna I'm gonna use a cartoon like the old, like the Jetsons, where you just hop in your own vehicle and you take off out of your own driveway. That's probably not going to happen. They're going to have restricted landing areas defined, and I see our current airport infrastructure as being that. So you may find that there's a network of places you're going to be able to take off and land, and I believe our small airports in the future are going to serve as that hub. So you're going to go from these smaller airports to the larger hubs. That's how I see a lot of the technology moving towards, not always automated cars, but automated aircraft.
I'll get in a self-driving car, but I'm not getting a self-driving plane. I'll say
Senator Mazza.
Yes, go ahead.
What, Dan, but can you give a quick ratio of federal to state on these highway projects? And maybe it's the same for the rail projects, but these are only being done because of the federal grants. So
okay, so on this particular, so the project we're talking, just to give you an example, I'll give you a snapshot. This particular project we're talking about here, there's 3 different projects going on here. There's the runway safety areas on each end, and those are 90-10, so 90% federal, 10% state. The taxiway project was part of the discretionary funding, and that's 100% federal. That taxiway is 100% federal. The fuel farm was not eligible for FAA funding, so the fuel farm is actually 100% state currently. We are looking for a federal source to federalize part of that, but we have not received any grant to federalize part of that. But we are going to move forward with it as it is until we can get, well, we're in the middle of looking at other federal parts. But anyway, as of this moment, 100% state funds on the fuel farm, 100% federal funds on the taxiway, 90-10 on the runway safety area paving.
What's our return on our investment? Would you get any money back, do we?
All
Do
right,
we
so
sell fuel on a fuel farm? Is that our profit? I mean, I'd like to know, what do we lose on every airport? That would be, you're right, Senator Perchlik.
we do not make money at our airports. We do not make money on our railways. We do not make money on our highways. So I don't think there's any mode that makes money, but we do make money on selling fuel, renting hangars. We've got hangars we own, which we make more money on than just the land. So it's lease payments and fuel. That's essentially our income at these airports.
And one follow-up, is there any benefit for freight? Like, or is there any freight being landed at the smaller airports?
Yes. So we currently have UPS service at our Berlin Knapp Airport. We have FedEx UPS at Rutland. Obviously Burlington is a huge hub for freight. We are currently in discussions with freight at one other small airport. And I can't really talk about it right now, but we are currently looking at that. So yes, there is a demand for freight at these airports.
And they pay per landing, or it's just like a deal you make with FedEx? Like if they're going to land there, it's an annual kind of deal.
Well, we sell them fuel every day, and they don't pay to land. We don't make them pay to land. There's not a landing fee for every plane.
I'm trying to get a concession stand there, Senator Perchlik, sell sandwiches, sell cold beer or something, you know what I mean?
Well, I'll tell you, with everybody expecting, Amazon next day
Right.
packages, that's what's happening here.
Oh yeah, that's taking over the world. Oh my God. Whew.
UPS backs up to that airplane every day up in Berlin. They back right up to the plane, and they, every single morning and every single night it flies out with Vermont packages. So it happens every day.
They order in the morning, they get it in the afternoon. What a different world. Wow.
But to Maz's question, that the only benefit to kind of the economics of the airport, there's other benefits. I'm not trying to say we need to make a profit, but as far increased activity, the economic benefit is increased food sales. There's no other benefit economically to the airport.
No, we don't charge them a landing fee, if that's what you're asking.
Right, or I didn't know if there was something else. That's for all the state airports. There's no, fuel sales and hangar rentals is the only
Yes,
revenue. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Dan,
yes.
this is Jane. Well, I guess so. I'm the only female voice on the committee. Um,
Ooh.
no, I mean, I don't mean it that way. That's why you would know who I am, because I can't see everybody with the screen. I had a letter from the folks at the airport in Lindenville about fuel sales and that how they used to be able to sell, and I think maybe they are not selling anything right now. And it tied in, it was the gentleman who's been involved in setting up an aviation museum there. Can you shed any light on what is happening there relative to fuel sales?
Yeah, that's Vinny. I'm sure that's who you talked to.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we had so the fuel tank that is there, it's not a huge fuel tank. I don't know if it's 5,000 gallons, I think something like, I might be wrong on that, but it's around 5,000 gallons. And it's what's considered avgas, so aviation gas. It's not Jet A fuel, it's aviation gas. And fuel can only sit around for so long before it kind of expires. And we had about, I don't know, we had a couple thousand gallons in that tank that they didn't sell enough fuel. And so that fuel had to be disposed of. You actually have to pay for it to get disposed of, or you can get it tested and recertified. But the cost to retest and recertify is more than basically buying new fuel. So long story short, we ended up selling the fuel to non-aviation users, drained the tank to as much as we could. The next step is we have to clean and recertify the tank, which is several $1,000s. It's expensive. And so through COVID, when things are kind of slowed down, we decided not to clean the tank and put new fuel in it just so it could sit around and get old again. We are reevaluating whether we want to open that fuel farm back up and when. We haven't made that decision yet. But you're right, currently there is no fuel for sale at Caledonia because the fuel there expired.
Was that a situation driven by COVID, or was the lack of sales volume pre-existing?
It was a lack of sales volume, and then COVID happened. So it wasn't because of COVID.
Okay.
Lack of sales volume happened pre-COVID, but we decided not to reinvest because of COVID right now. It wasn't the right time to fill that tank with 5,000 gallons of fuel and let it sit around and get stale again.
Okay, thank you. I just thought I would ask, when you mentioned fuel farm, it triggered that thought, that question.
Right. All right, Paul, go ahead.
Okay. I was going to say there was a slide previously that talked about the funding. If you wanted to see anything particular or specific, one more back. Right there. That talks about the funding. Those are our contract amounts as well as our splits that Dan was talking about.
Okay, all right.
There are a few more slides we can go through if you'd like.
Yeah,
Well, we've got about 5 more minutes, and we have to take a break for 15 minutes before we go on to our next one. So,
All right. Well, we'll zip through the last few slides then, if you don't mind rolling down a few.
Okay.
Let's see, keep going a little bit more. Yes, another view of the runway looking south. Then the next slide, I'm going to just get into a little more specific about the project, which Dan pretty much covered all of them, but new pavements, new markings, new lighting, of course, which is inherent to a new paving. There's a retaining wall we have to put on one end to bring the elevation up so that it meets our requirements for, you can't have a steep bank next to a runway, of course. Inherent stormwater improvements, and then you've got your permanent monumentation, which essentially documents and reports your new geometry at your runway and your safety areas and your taxiways, so that aviators, air pilots, and the FAA know what you have at your airport. That way, when they look it up, they can see what your geometry looks like. Next slide, please. So the parallel taxiway construction, again, includes a lot of pavement, markings, lighting. We're taking out the existing fuel farms, as we talked about. New fuel farm is going in the later project. A lot of stormwater improvements have to happen. With anytime you have new impervious surface, you have to treat that runoff in certain ways. That's what our stormwater improvements include, whether it's infiltration. We don't want to have stormwater ponds on airports because we don't want to introduce any wildlife that may want to interact with that body of water, which doesn't mix with aircraft very well. So our treatments for stormwater are usually are much more subtle and less visible. So some of that Yankee ingenuity has to happen to be sure we can properly treat that stormwater without some of the standard measures. Next, please. A lot of this we've talked about already. This is a little more on the fuel farm. 10,000 gallons for Jet A and for avgas. There'll be self-serving vending, emergency shutoffs, spill control, kind of the basics for a fuel farm. Next, please. And then the schedule, which we have talked about. This is going to be a really busy 2021 for this airport with essentially 3 different projects going on. We were lucky that the first 2 are the same contractor. They were the successful low bidder on both. And so some of that coordination effort that would be a little more tough if it were 2 different contractors was avoided by, I wouldn't say avoided, but we lucked out essentially with the low bidder being the same for each project. So beginning very soon this month, they'll mobilize. There'll be a runway shutdown that happens for 60+ days to get a lot of the on runway work completed, where there'll be no aircraft in or out. So that will be very helpful and productive for us to utilize that. Mid-June, the runway reopens. And then by September, October, the taxiway's done. And then this fall, early winter, the fuel farm work should be up and running. It's kind of a quick snapshot of our schedule, but it's going to be a super busy season at Morrisville-Stowe Airport as well this coming year.
In one of the earlier diagrams, there was called a future runway.
Future taxiway.
What is the length of that?
Let's see. So if you keep going up, it should be in one of the earlier slides.
It was earlier on,
Yeah,
right
here you go.
there, future taxiway, yeah.
Down just one more slide.
Yeah, right there, the future taxiway A.
So there's, you see where it says taxiway Alpha 3? Do you see where that kind of goes back in to the runway about midway runway? Not the future one, that's in a kind of a diagram.
No, the bar across that, yeah, to the runway.
Yeah. So the one that goes all the way to the right of the screen, while it's showing as a future project, that has a lot of challenges, and that right-hand end of that taxiway, while it doesn't represent it that well, you can kind of see it, goes right through a wetland area. So we're not sure that, even though we're showing this as a potential future project, we're not sure that that can actually be built like that because it's going to interfere with a pretty intensive wetland area. So realistically, now our current project, like I said, our current project ends kind of at the red vertical lines. So there's a next phase that'll go from that red line over to where it says taxiway Alpha 3. So that's kind of our next phase, is to get it so we have a parallel taxiway that runs about half the runway length. That's what we're hoping for in our next sort of phase. But the future phase is, we're unsure if that, because of permitting, we're unsure that that can be built as it's shown on the plan. So we're hoping to. And again, this is our airport layout plan. It's a planning document. It's something that it just shows what we're looking at. But certainly no design or permitting has been done in that section.
Okay, that covers it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so hopefully we're all standing around cutting a ribbon here as well, Senator Mazza, in the
All
fall.
right, well, you've got some interesting projects. All right, committee, we'll see you at 11 o'clock. We'll take a break.